Today, I'm painting the same miniature twice, once in just 30 minutes and then again in 30 hours. And at the end we'll see how much of a difference time really makes. Hi, I'm Zumikito and I paint miniatures for a living. Oh yeah, it's not stressful at all. I'm only 28 and my beard is turning grey. Jesus. And because I received 2 copies of the same miniature from today's sponsor, Kingdom Death, I decided to use both. One to paint for gaming purposes and the other one to really push myself to create a unique piece of art. We'll see whether 60 times more hours results in 60 times better result, but now, let's assemble.
Mini skirt on, dip my body in glitter. Platform sneakers, all the boys want a picture. Two foreign cars, I make rich look richer. Save your breath, baby, I'm not going home with ya. Mini skirt on, dip my body in glitter. Platform sneakers, all the boys want a picture. Two foreign cars, I make rich look richer. Skirt on, dip my body in glitter. Platform sneakers, all the boys want a picture. Two foreign cars, I make rich look richer. Save your breath, baby, I'm not going home with ya. Mini skirt on, take my body in glitter. Platform sneakers, all the boys want a picture. Two foreign cars, I make rich look richer.
With the miniature assembled and fully primed, it's time to paint. Since I'm measuring the time from the very first brushstroke, preparation is key. I don't always do this, but it's a good idea to put all the paints on the palette beforehand. Wasting any time on getting more paints later is just silly, because 30 minutes is not much time as it is. As you can imagine, I'll be using mostly contrast type paints, which will do most of the heavy lifting here, but not everything. That's also the reason why I used black primer first and zenithal priming on top, which will make the result even more pronounced. And with all the tools ready, let's begin. The first 15 minutes were about covering the white undercoat. Looking back, I shouldn't have started with the hair, because I might accidentally touch it when painting the skin, which, by the way, that will happen, but it made sense to me at the time because it will require more work than the other parts. So I needed to be dry fast. The hair and the face of this character is actually the reason why I picked this one to paint instead of the other 3 characters that are in the box. Curly hair is quite unique on miniatures, and the eyes have plenty of room to work with, which you'll see on the 30-hour version even more. Another part that requires more work than just contrast paint is the skin. My 30 minutes include the drying time, so it makes sense to get this out of the way first. On one of the shoulders, the paint collided with the blue layer, and it created this sort of green shade. And this was truly a happy accident, because it makes for a good shade color. So you know, it worked out in the end. I also tried to paint the eyes already, but what a shocker, it's still not dry. So I just wasted like 20 seconds. The most present color on this miniature is this warm brown. It's clear that not all parts on the legs are supposed to be leather. But listen, we don't have time for that, so let's move on. Also, instead of painting the daggers, if these even are daggers, I should have continued on the tunic and the arms, because they are also brown. It cost me a few seconds, but I guess it's not a big deal. But generally speaking, you wanna start with the parts that are difficult to reach first, and then paint more exposed parts and minimize switching between paints. This will make you faster and you won't have to come back to fix anything later. Or not as much. One unpleasant surprise was this juicy red paint. Initially, it looked like it could make for a really nice blood effect, but at the end it looks poo-poo. Maybe I needed more than one pass, or maybe I needed lighter undercoat. But 30 minutes is all I had, and there were more important parts. So speaking of the important parts, let's work on the focal points with regular paints. Typically, there are a few obvious points of interest on every miniature, and if you put more effort into those, it pays off more than any other part. Usually, this is the head and weapons, so indeed those are refined more than the rest. Around 4 minutes were spent on painting the eyes, and the result for that kinda time investment is not bad at all. And that's kinda the point. If anyone looks at this miniature and appreciates this detail, it creates an impression of refinement, even though most of the mini is super neglected. Together with the face, I also thought that the rest of the skin deserves more attention, along with the weapons and the hair. So after spending some more time on the skin, the rest of my 30-minute budget was spent on finishing touches, mostly on the hair. All I did is just paint some reflections around the face and focus on the front of the miniature. It's quite helpful that the back of the mini is not so complex, so I can focus on the front. And typically that's all that people care about anyway. Okay, so I have a confession to make. This didn't take me 30 minutes exactly, but 30 minutes and 21 seconds. Okay, I guess this is not a big deal, but I wanna be really transparent here. I'll also include a full recording of the painting in the description if you wanna see it for yourself. In the end, I am really happy with this mini, and it'll be interesting comparing it to the 30-hour version. 30 minutes is not a lot, and when you consider that, this is really good. Initially, I thought I might as well do 3-hour version, which is something that I would put into my gaming models, but once this mini was done, I think 3-hour version wouldn't be that much different. So it would be cool to give it some extra time for some minor touch-ups, but for gaming purposes, this is totally fine. Now, as I'm preparing to paint another copy of this mini, let's talk about where it's from. As I said, today's sponsor is Kingdom Death, and they sent me 2 sprues of their newest release, which you'll find on their website. For what it's worth, you might have seen me paint Kingdom Death many times already. Oh, you didn't know? Well, this is from Kingdom Death, or this, this, you get the point. I love Kingdom Death minis, and these are no exception. Aside from the minis, you get their artwork and additional rules if you play the game. Wait, hold on. Oh, these are spears, not daggers. For me, the most value is in the minis, but I also do play the game. And this is the proof. I mean, just look how much gear I collected across the years. You can craft all of this. Crazy. It's like if you mix Dark Souls, D&D, and Animal Crossing, and put it into a board game. I know it sounds wild, but if you know, you know. In any case, Kingdom Death is currently running a Black Friday sale with limited releases. So whether you like these miniatures or any other, check out their website and see for yourself. Link is in the description. And thank you Kingdom Death for sponsoring this video, and I'm sure that this isn't the last one. To paint the other miniature and squeeze the maximum out of my 30-hour limit, I decided to do something special. Most of the time when people are painting minis for their board games, they paint them as if they were in a diffused light. However, we are not doing that. Instead, I wanna try something special. Directional light. There will be a warm light from the top right, and the miniature itself will be in a cold environment with purple ambience. To paint like that, I have prepared 3 references. First one is a photo of the mini in a black primer, to see where to place the reflections on the metallics, because the primer is a bit glossy. Instead of putting it directly under a lamp, which I do in other videos, I moved my lamp to the top right to simulate the light. However, not every surface on the mini is as glossy as in our reference. So I took another picture after I sprayed white ink from the top right. Now the light should be even more obvious, and even though I will paint over that, it'll serve me as a guide. Finally, when it comes to color choice, I was inspired by this amazing painter. Coincidentally, this model is also from Kingdom Death, and it's probably the biggest inspiration. With these 3 references, there is nothing to fear, and we can start. Although I am not using any contrast paints, I am using translucent layers. This time around, starting with the skin is preferable. We have way more time. And it also makes sense to start with the parts that are more hidden or on the inside. Right now I might paint over the hair or the armor, for example, but that's completely fine and better than painting the armor first. This is because if the armor was fully painted and then I decided to paint the skin, there would be higher likelihood of overspilling. Other than that, painting the skin was a matter of sketching lighter colors and blending them later. Sometimes you wanna gradually paint entire mini layer after layer, but this approach also works, And that's especially true when we try to simulate directional light. Your sketch will give you a better idea if it works or not. Then blending it is a matter of glazing, glaze stippling, or whatever you wanna call it, just using very thin layers and being patient. It's time to start adding some ambience. Pretty much every part which isn't directly exposed to the warm light will have some influence of the purple ambience, and you'll see how that works later. I also decided to push the skin even further by adding some really light yellow. If you remember what I said when I was painting the 13-minute version, the head and the weapons are usually the focal points. In this case, that's especially true. And that means that everything around the facial area will be lighter than the rest. Again, if the head is important, then the eyes are even more important. There are no shortcuts if you want a high quality result. I started by covering them with black. Inside of that I used very light gray. But notice how the left eye is a bit more purple, while the right one leans towards yellow. It's these tiny details that will collectively create a believable result. Then I painted a black dot inside the eye. This represents border of the iris, and I had to adjust it a little bit. Inside of that I painted a small turquoise dot, which is the iris. And finally, there is a little white dot that represents a glossy reflection. Ooh yeah, baby! Base coating the hair is similar to skin, so the first layer doesn't cover perfectly, which is fine. I want some of the zenithal priming to guide me. However, I decided to wet blend the other side by adding purple. Usually wet blending is quite messy, but it's perfectly fine to make a basic gradient and paint on top of that. Then it's just a matter of correctly placing the reflections and gradually adding lighter and lighter colors. Instead of adding white, I am adding more yellowish tones, which will emphasize our warm light source. Because blue and yellow are not exactly friendly with each other, this required a lot of back and forth. And that means that getting to this point took me 8 hours. The other side of the miniature is not exposed and therefore the purple is highlighted with more desaturated highlights. All the parts that are only partially exposed will have some gray on them. This will connect the warm light and the purple ambient. However, even the parts that are exposed will have some purple in the recesses, just not as much. This is because our model is in the same environment, which is purple. And if there is a place where the light doesn't get, which are the recesses, the purple ambience stays there. Then it's all pretty similar. Exposed parts will have warm highlights and they'll be lighter, and the less exposed parts will be purple and way darker. Everything in the middle will lean towards gray, and that will unite the warm right side with the left. What I'm proud of in particular are these little cones. Painting very sharp reflections of different colors will make any light effects more obvious. The top reflections are warm and I place them according to my black primer reference. The secondary reflections are about the environment and bounce light. But to put it simply, I place the main reflections according to the reference, and for secondary ones, I just make sure that there is a dark shade between them. However, the less exposed side reflects way more purple, especially the bottom reflections. As I mentioned, I used some purple pretty much on every part of the miniature. Of course, you can tell that some parts are different colors. So for example, as I'm painting the leather, I mix in some brown in between purple shadows and yellow highlights, so it's recognizable. More neutral colors like black, white and gray are more tricky in this regard, because you don't really have any color to mix in between there. So those parts will be affected by the yellow light and purple ambience way more. It's just that darker parts like the gloves won't reflect as much as the fabric, for example. Moving even further, the middle section is painted gold. There are two things to note. One, gold won't reflect purple or blue effectively, because that's just how it works. You see, gold is yellow because it specifically absorbs blue wavelength. But hey, that's just a theory, a game theory. And second, these bits right above the cups are actually supposed to be leather, not gold. But hey, this is my model, you can't stop me! The rest of the model was pretty straightforward. I knew exactly where to place the reflections, which color should I use for which part, so the only problem was I was running out of time. I knew that I gotta give more attention to the weapons, but by the time they were finished, I was around 20 hours in, and there was still much to do. So to get it out of the way, I blocked in the rest of the colors and did whatever was necessary. Even though some parts aren't finished, I have to move forward to finish the legs, and if there is some time left, the rest can be always refined later. Again, I had to smooth out the skin a little bit, but the real problem is everything below that. Painting all these details is exactly the same as I did before, only there is many of them left. And so, with under 7 hours left, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, I did what I could. Okay, so after 30 hours of painting, this is what we got. Although I do like the result, there are still parts that are a bit behind. For example, the base is more sketched and could use some more improvement. The cape and the hair will need some touch-ups, and if I had more time, I would certainly paint another light source from the lantern. But with the time I've given myself, I love it. Compared to the other version, it's obviously so much better. But is it 60 times better? Well, probably not. Anytime you paint a miniature to a high standard, the last 10% can take you as much time as the initial 90%. So it makes sense that as you add more and more effort, every additional hour spent on your mini is less useful. However, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I will probably pick up the model again and refine it even further, to make it feel truly finished. This video also proves that if you are painting just for gaming, you can still get striking results that look good very quickly. Anyway, I also made similar video where I paint the same miniature in 10 minutes, 1 hour and 10 hours. So if you wanna see similar kind of comparison on Warhammer, check out this video. And see you there!